Hello students, today we are going to start with the second chapter of history of class 7th, that is the new kings and kingdoms. In this chapter we will study about the emergence of new dynasties, administration in the kingdoms, prasastis and land grants, warfare for wealth. We will also study about the Chola kingdom, which was a very important kingdom at that time, and also about the agriculture and irrigation system in that kingdom. Apart from that, the administration of that empire. So, let's start this chapter. Many new dynasties emerged after the 7th century. Now, in this map, you can see the major ruling dynasties in different parts of the subcontinent between the 7th and 12th century. Now, talking about the emergence of new dynasties, by the 7th century there were big landlords or warrior chiefs in different regions of the subcontinent. Existing kings often acknowledged them as their subordinates or samants. They were expected to bring gifts for their kings or overlords, be present at their courts, and provide them with military support. As Samants gained power and wealth, they declared themselves to be Mahasamant or Mahamandaleshwar. Mahamandaleshwar means the great lord of a circle or region, and so on. Sometimes they asserted their independence from their overlords. One such instance was that of the Rashtrakutas in the Deccan. Initially, they were subordinate to the Chalukyas of Karnataka. In the mid-8th century, Dantidurg, a Rashtrakuta chief, overthrew his Chalukya overlord and performed a ritual called Hiranyagarbha, which means the golden womb. When this ritual was performed with the help of Brahmins, it was thought to lead to the rebirth of the sacrificer as a Kshatriya, even if he was not one by birth. In other cases, men from enterprising families used their military skills to carve out kingdoms. For instance, the Kadamb Mayuru Sharman and the Gurjar Pratyahara Harichandra were Brahmins who gave up their traditional professions and took to arms, successfully establishing kingdoms in Karnataka and Rajasthan respectively. Many of these new kings adopted high-sounding titles such as Maharaja Dhiraj, which means Great King, Overlord of Kings, Tribhuvan Chakravartin, Lord of the Three Worlds, and so on. However, in spite of such claims, they often shared power with their Samants as well as with association of peasants, traders, and Brahmins. In each of these states, resources were obtained from the producers, that is peasants, cattle keeper, artisans, who were often persuaded or compelled to surrender part of what they produced. Sometimes they were claimed as rent due to a lord who asserted that he owned the land. Revenue was also collected from traders. These resources were used to finance the king's establishment as well as for the construction of temples and forts. They were also used to fight wars, which were in turn expected to lead to the acquisition of wealth in the form of plunder and access to land as well as trade routes. The functionaries for collecting revenue were generally recruited from influential families, and positions were often hereditary. This was true about the army as well. In many cases, close relatives of the king held those positions. Now, if we talk about prashastis and land grants, now prashastis contain details that may not be literally true, but they tell us how rulers wanted to depict themselves as valiant, victorious warriors, for example. These were composed by learned Brahmins who occasionally helped in the administration. Kings often rewarded Brahmins by grants of land. These were recorded on copper plates which were given to those who received the land. Unusual for the 12th century was a long Sanskrit poem containing the history of kings who ruled over Kashmir. It was composed by an author named Kalhan. He used a variety of sources, including inscriptions, documents, eyewitness accounts, and earlier histories, to write his account. Unlike the writers of Prashastis, he was often critical about rulers and their policies. Now, over here in this figure, you can see this is a set of copper plates recording a grant of land made by a ruler in the 9th century, written partly in Sanskrit and partly in Tamil. The ring holding the plates together is secured with the royal seal to indicate that this is an authentic document. Now let's come to our next topic, that is warfare for wealth. Now each of these ruling dynasties were based in a specific region. At the same time, they tried to control other areas. One particularly prized area was the city of Kannauj in the Ganga Valley. For centuries, rulers belonging to the Gurjar Pratihara, Rashtrakuta, and Pala dynasties fought for control over Kannauj. Because there were three parties in this long drawn conflict, historians often describe it as the tripartite struggle. At that time, rulers also tried to demonstrate their power and resources by building large temples. So, when they attacked one another's kingdoms, they often chose to target temples which were sometimes extremely rich. One of the best known of such rulers is Sultan Mahmud of Ghazni, which is in Afghanistan. He ruled from 997 to 1030 and extended control over parts of the Central Asia, Iran, and the northwestern part of the subcontinent. He raided the subcontinent almost every year. His targets were wealthy temples, including that of Somnath in Gujarat. Much of the wealth Mahmud carried away was used to create a splendid capital city at Ghazni. Sultan Mahmud was also interested in finding out more about the people he conquered and entrusted a scholar named Al Baruni to write an account of the subcontinent. This Arabic work, known as Kitab al Hind, remains an important source for historians. He consulted Sanskrit scholars to prepare this account. Other kings who engaged in warfare included the Chahmans, later known as the Chauhans, who ruled over the region around Delhi and Ajmer. They attempted to expand their control to the west and the east, where they were opposed by the Chalukyas of Gujarat and the Garhwals of western Uttar Pradesh. The best known Chahman ruler or the Chauhan ruler was Prithvi Raj III, who ruled very strongly over his kingdom and defeated an Afghan ruler named Sultan Muhammad Ghori in 1191 but lost to him the very next year in 1192. Now let's talk about a major kingdom of that time in South India, that was the Chola kingdom. Now in this map you can see the Chola kingdom and its neighbors. Now talking about the Cholas, a minor chiefly family known as the Muttarayar held power in the Kaveri Delta. They were subordinate to the Pallava kings of Kanchipuram. Vijayalaya who belonged to the ancient chiefly family of the Cholas from Urayur, captured the delta from the Muttarayar in the middle of the ninth century. He built the town of Thanjavur and a temple for goddess Nishumbasudini there. The successors of Vijayalaya conquered neighboring regions and the kingdom grew in size and power. The Pandyan and the Pallava territories to the south and north were made part of this kingdom. Rajaraja I, considered the most powerful Chola ruler, became king in 985 and expanded control over most of these areas. He also reorganized the administration of the empire. Rajaraja's son Rajendra I continued his policies and even raided the Ganga Valley, Sri Lanka, and countries of Southeast Asia, developing a navy for these expeditions. The big temples of Thanjavur and Gangaikonda Cholapuram, built by Rajaraja and Rajendra, are architectural and sculptural marvels. Now, this is the temple of Gangaikonda Cholapuram. Just notice the way in which the roof tapers. Also, have a look at the elaborate stone sculptures used to decorate the outer walls. Chola temples often became the nuclei of settlements which grew around them. These were the centers of craft and production. Temples were also endowed with land by rulers as well as by the others. The produce of this land went into maintaining all the specialists who worked at the temple and very often lived near it, like priests, garland makers, cooks, sweepers, musicians, dancers, etc. In other words, temples were not only places of worship, they were the hub of economic, social, and cultural life as well. Amongst the craft associated with temples, the making of bronze images was the most distinctive. Chola bronze images are considered amongst the finest in the world. While most images were of deities, sometimes images were made of devotees as well. Many of the achievements of the Cholas were made possible through new developments in agriculture. The river Kaveri branches off into several small channels before emptying into the Bay of Bengal. These channels overflow frequently, depositing fertile soil on their banks. Water from the channels also provides the necessary moisture for agriculture, particularly the cultivation of rice. Although agriculture had developed earlier in other parts of Tamil Nadu, it was only from the 5th or 6th century that this area was opened up for large scale cultivation. Forests had to be cleared in some regions, land had to be leveled in other areas. In the delta region, embankments had to be built to prevent flooding and canals had to be constructed to carry water to the fields. In many areas, two crops were grown in a year. Now over here in this figure, you can see a 9th century sluice gate in Tamil Nadu. This sluice gate was used to regulate the outflow of water from a tank into the channels that irrigated the fields. Now, in many cases, it was necessary to water crops artificially. A variety of methods were used for irrigation. In some areas, wells were dug. In other places, huge tanks were constructed to collect rainwater. Remember that irrigation works require planning, organizing labor and resources, maintaining these works, and deciding on how water is to be shared. Most of the new rulers, as well as people living in villages, took an active interest in these activities. Now, if we talk about the administration of the empire, settlements of peasants, known as became prosperous with the spread of irrigation agriculture. Groups of such villages formed larger units called Nadu. The village council and the Nadu performed several administrative functions, including dispensing justice and collecting taxes. Rich peasants of the Vellala caste exercised considerable control over the affairs of the Nadu under the supervision of the central Chola government. The Chola kings gave some rich landowners titles like Muvain the Velan, a Velan or peasant serving three kings, Arayar, that is the chief, etc., as markers of respect and entrusted them with important offices of the state at the center. Now we know that Brahmins often received land grants or Brahmadeya. As a result, a large number of Brahmin settlements emerged in the Kaveri Valley as in other parts of South India. Now, at that time in the Chola kingdom, there were various types of lands, and that means various categories of land. The first was Velan Vangai, which was the land of non-Brahman peasant proprietors. Then there was Brahmadeya, which was the land gifted to Brahmins. The third type was of Shalabhog, which was the land for the maintenance of a school. Then there was Devdan or Tirunmattukani, which was another category, which meant land gifted to temples. Then the another category was Palichandam, which meant land donated to Jain institutions. So these were the various categories under the Chola kingdom. Now each Brahmade was looked after by an assembly or sabha of prominent Brahman landholders. These assemblies worked very efficiently. Their decisions were recorded in detail in inscriptions, often on the stone walls of temples. Associations of traders, known as nagarams, also occasionally performed administrative functions in towns. Inscriptions from Uttar Merur in Chingleput district of Tamil Nadu provide details of the way in which the Sabha was organized. The Sabha had separate committees to look after irrigation works, gardens, temples, etc. Names of those eligible to be members of these committees were written on a small ticket of palm leaf. These tickets were put into an earthenware pot from which a young boy was asked to take out the tickets one by one for each committee. So, students, that's it for this chapter. Do read this chapter very thoroughly, and if you find any kind of problem, do ask the question in the comment section below this video. अगर आपको इस चैप्टर में किसी तरह की कोई भी प्रॉब्लम आ रही है अपने क्वेश्चंस कमेंट सेक्शन में वीडियो के नीचे मेंशन करिए. आई विल आंसर दोज क्वेश्चंस. थैंक यू.